Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, Mass Effect Legendary Edition seems to be the name that Mr. Jeff Grubb over on VentureBeat is giving the remade, remastered, redone, redux version of the original Mass Effect. Now, he's detailed some stuff in regards to how the Mass Effect trilogy is going to be coming out. He talked about this at the start of the year, and that EA were exploring this idea of re-releasing the original games. But apparently, because Mass Effect 1 is nowhere near the, I don't know what you want to call it, level of controllable quality as between Mass Effect 1 to 2 and 3. He's then been talking to the developers of, assumedly BioWare for this, and they've said that they want to raise Mass Effect 1 up so it matches up with 2 and 3. I guess there's some quotes and stuff in here, but what's your initial thoughts on that? Because we talked about that as well when the initial piece of news came out. That I adore Mass Effect 1 for everything other than the gameplay, essentially.
Totally. That is kind of like, it's not the weak link in the series, because I love Mass Effect 1. Like, I think Mass Effect 1's story and world building and characters are great, but in terms of, mechanical polish or mechanical complexity or, that gameplay satisfaction, it's just not quite up to snuff. Like, the leap in combat between 1 and 2 is huge, yes. So you would want them to, if they're going back to it, perhaps tweak that in a way that does bring it up to the same level of 2 and 3 in terms of, playability, in terms of control, in terms of responsiveness. Because, even though those action sequences in that first game aren't, well executed, the concepts behind them are really interesting and could be something, better than they currently are. I mean, it depends what they're doing. Is it going to be like a full remake? Are they just remastering it? Because in a way, if they just gave me all of the DLC and a kind of up-res version of the original trilogy, like, that would be fine for me personally, but I don't know whether you can really do that now in the world of remakes that we're currently in. We've enjoyed the Mafia Definitive Edition, we've got Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, we've had, Crash, we've had Resident Evil. They've all raised the bar from what we expect, and I think, sorry to keep rambling, but I think the reaction to the Prince of Persia trailer might have been a bit telling, because people were kind of up in the air about the way that game looked, how it didn't look like a proper remake. And I wonder whether the people who are working on the Mass Effect remaster have maybe seen the backlash to that and thought, yeah, we can do more with this. That's purely conjecture on my part, but maybe. There's a quote, so he's been talking to some different developers, and obviously they're going to remain anonymous and stuff, but this is from VentureBeat, he's been talking to the idea of, talking to the devs about the idea of reapproaching the original trilogy, and these are his words, and it says, the primary factor holding up development beyond the pandemic is the original Mass Effect game. It currently doesn't live up to the quality of the rest of the package. It would make a poor first impression for new players, and it might disappoint fans who then wouldn't go on to play and experience the impressive upgrades of Mass Effect 2 and 3. And he says that that's a problem in regards to, on the dev side, in regards to visuals and gameplay. The people working on the game understand these issues and they want to do right by the franchise's fans. Now, I love Mass Effect 2. It's literally one of my favorite games of all time, and I cite that as, for me, it plays better than Mass Effect 3, and I can't pin that down specifically unless I played them side by side. But I remember going back to Mass Effect 2 after finishing 3 and just thinking that 2 just felt better. I just preferred the way it felt. And I don't know how they'll sort of homogenize a control scheme or a feel across all 3 games, because with the Crash trilogy, I forget the devs of the Crash trilogy. Vicarious Visions, I think it was.
Yes. Old VV, they dove in and sort of tried to homogenize a feel for Crash across all 3 games that inadvertently made the first game, at least for me, feel really weird, because you had Crash 3's sense of momentum and his jump distance and things like that. And if you're reapproaching the Mass Effect trilogy, do you then try and pick a game or try and find a feel that you can then apply to all 3 games so that people who are going to play all 3 in a row it doesn't feel jarring? Is that something you'd want them to do, or do you think they should kind of keep them separate?
It depends. It completely depends how they approach, remastering it, because I don't think it would work if you just plugged in Mass Effect 2 or Mass Effect 3's combat system into 1, because that game wasn't designed for combat like that. You know what I mean? The layout of the levels, for instance, wouldn't accommodate that style of more fast-paced gameplay, I suppose. But if they were kind of like rejigging some of the level design, rejigging some of the encounters, I think it does make sense, because like Mass Effect 1, for as much as I love it, it's partly because I was there right at the time. as their launch day, but playing that game. I know Ash is a huge fan of the Mass Effect franchise, obviously, but even she said that she jumped in with 2, and when she went back to 1, she kind of had that weird, worry that maybe it wasn't going to be for her because the combat system was way inferior. And it's not that it doesn't have some good ideas. I love the back button to throw that disc grenade and then to detonate it. I quite like the overheating thing, but I just think they can get away.
Why the overheating thing?
Well, because I've got nostalgia for it, you know what I mean? It was there. That to me, that for a long time, that was Mass Effect. I mean,
this is like you like the guns jamming in Far Cry 2 as well. Give me all the inconveniences, break all the weapons when I'm using them.
Dude, I also like the Mako, whatever you want to call it. I used to love that thing. Yeah, like that just has no gravity. You just sort of fly all over the place. I'm interested to see what they do with that in the remake, to be fair. But yeah, there are all of these elements that even at the time were quite derided, were quite, pointed out as being major letdowns. And I think, 13 years on now, those will only stand out even more. Jesus, we're 13 years on from Mass Effect 1. Just saying that out loud has made me feel old. I think they can plug it in.
Yeah, the way that they handled, obviously, Mass Effect Andromeda as well, like the sort of rush development, the stuff that came out from Kotaku behind the scenes, they prioritized the multiplayer side of things, and that obviously resulted in the main campaign just being so barely stitched together. And then obviously all the plans afterwards were scrapped and the franchise has been on ice. And you would kind of hope that this can revitalize it in a way. It is almost fundamentally quite sad being like, well, the only thing that we have for Mass Effect is the memories, and we can sort of like shine them up real nice and go like, remember when you cared? Here's the do you want that? And then maybe that'll work again. He does say, another part of this report from Mr. Jeff Grubb is that multiplayer for Mass Effect 3 isn't being included because on the dev side, I don't know how much of this is Grubb's assumption or it comes from the things that he found talking to the devs, but apparently EA don't want to go down the live service route with Mass Effect 3 because obviously that would require a bigger investment in terms of, you need people to run those things if you're going to make the Mass Effect multiplayer platform, even if it does come from Mass Effect 3. But the trilogy will include all DLC for all games, so that you are buying this package of Mass Effect. I hope that it's a full-on Mafia Definitive Edition style overhaul. But if it is in response to something more recent, like you said, something like Prince of Persia, then we won't be getting it anytime soon. And I think that it makes more sense to line it up with something like N7 Day, do it on November 7th. And let it be backwards compatible with the new consoles, ride that whole wave. But if whatever they were initially planning for the overhaul of the first game is more in line with, texture pack overhauls and things like that, they're not going to build it from the ground up like Hangar 13 have with Mafia, then that could just backfire again because you would get people picking it up and going, oh my god, what the hell is this? I don't want to throw a grenade with the back button, and I'm not going to play it on PS5 or whatever. And for me, I want Mass Effect to feel revitalized. If you're going to give it to a new generation, it has to land so strong. I guess that's the thing that they're most aware of. In Jeff Grubb's follow-up video, he did do a video on his own YouTube channel talking about it, and he compared the changes more to the Zelda HD re-releases rather than the Mario ones, the recent Mario ones. So in that case, one of the most prominent Zelda re-releases was Wind Waker, where they changed around some of the mission structures and stuff like that. But it wasn't this Mafia ground-up overhaul thing. It was more like a tweak. And so I kind of wonder about stuff like that. I mean, maybe they're just going to trim down the Mako stuff, make it so it's less fetch quests and things like that. I don't know. I guess like wishlist stuff, I would take a Mass Effect 1 that plays like 2, but that might just be fundamentally impossible.
Maybe, I mean, I don't know, because I'm not a game designer, obviously, I don't know how much they can fundamentally change, like with the original code, or how much they want to change rather than building it from the ground up. I think it's fine that they're just going back to what they had and kind of updating it. That still worked for a lot of games, and for games as good as Mass Effect, like, you don't need necessarily a ground-up remake of them just to make them better. All it potentially takes is a few tweaks, like even with Mass Effect 1, when that came to PC, they already made a few tweaks to how the combat worked and how the UI worked and stuff like that. So you can keep iterating on changes that have already been made. Like, that's not unprecedented. For me, I would love to see them go back to the Mako stuff from Mass Effect 1, like the procedurally generated planets, and just kind of fill them with more stuff. Because the idea of having an entire universe to explore, even though you only got a couple tens
like
worth
2
of
buildings.
planets. Yeah, you didn't get much on those planets. Still, I feel like if you could fill that out a little bit more, that might be cool, because that's kind of what I wanted from Mass Effect Andromeda. The idea that you have this whole galaxy to explore, and you could go on different planets, go and find out these really cool things. And, you know, in 2007, I just don't think the original Mass Effect quite had the tech to back that up at that point. You know, there was a lot of copied and pasted assets and stuff. But now we've got games like, you know, No Man's Sky and stuff that do offer this kind of like promise of an entire galaxy that you could implement some ideas of to this original game, kind of like go backwards and kind of like just build on that foundation that's already there and was already quite compelling 13 years ago. It just makes something a bit bigger than what it was. That said though, Scott Tilford, I'll take it in any form. I love Mass Effect so much that I'm going to buy this, even if it's like, you know, crap, even if it's the equivalent of the Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1 and 2 bundle. I will still be there day one, because I have no willpower.
That's the low bar for what you need to. What you need to avoid is prototypes re-releases or Ultimate Alliances re-releases where it's just the same game but you're charging a lot of money for it. And I guess the top bar is something like the Mafia Definitive Edition or Saints Row 3. And somewhere in there, hopefully you can land pretty well. One last question though, do you think that they will change anything in regards to Mass Effect 3's ending? Because I think that they'll include all the extended cut stuff. Obviously with that game having its DLC, it makes the story make sense, which is one of the biggest problems that we had back in 2012 or whatever, was that without the DLC, I think it's the Sentinel DLC that fundamentally explains what the hell is going on with Star Child and whatever. Do you think they'll do anything with that, or will by de facto like including those DLC packages and letting people play through all of it in one go fundamentally allows that stuff to make sense in a way that it never did in 2012, and they can just steer around and be like, look, all the answers were here, we just, EA just sort of made us separate them for a bit, but we've got them together again.
Nah, I think at this point, like, that's the ending they went with. They committed to it with the extended cut. Like, I wouldn't want them to open up an old wound. Like, my position on this has changed over the years. Like, when Mass Effect 3 came out, I was one of the people who was really annoyed and really outraged in being like, this has to be the indoctrination theory. They've got to give us answers. They've got to change the ending. But now that I'm a bit older, I'm like, you know what? It was ultimately their decision. Like, I have no right to be like, change this story to be how I like it. I might not enjoy the story, but I don't want them to be coming back and trying to please a bunch of fans, because ultimately, it's been so long, and if you go back and you try to retroactively make it better now, like, who are you doing that for? Like, it might be a win for the fans, but there's still going to be so many people who still don't like it. We saw that with the extended cut, you know what I mean? That filled in a lot of gaps, but people still have fundamental problems with it. And I just think you change the fabric of the whole game if you go back in and try to tweak that a little bit more. Maybe you could add a few more lines here and there that add context or make it make a bit more sense, but I don't think we'll see any sort of fundamental changes to it.
Yeah, I'm curious what a new generation thinks of all that stuff, or new players. Like, if you're going into Mass Effect now, because you have that whole thing, that big talking point of how much the first one changed to become Mass Effect 2, and then obviously Mass Effect 3's ending, but it was hampered so much by EA coming in and going like, oh, Mass Effect 3 is the perfect first Mass Effect game for any new player, and everybody who was with it to that point was like, what the hell are you guys doing? Why are you making this for a new audience just for the third installment? But yeah, I'm curious how a new player base takes to that stuff. Maybe they'll have zero problem with the ending, and the whole Mass Effect trilogy can kind of be elevated even more as what I would still say it's the best sci-fi series in gaming history. It's just that at the very end of 3, it was always that big talking point of like, but they didn't stick the landing. Maybe they, with this becoming the definitive edition or something, they can kind of reinsert themselves as, no, we did have a plan, we had all this stuff, and here's how it was, like a director's cut or something. They could Blade Runner it and be like, here's how it was supposed to be. And that could be the way that things go forward. So yeah, let us know anything down in the comments below of the idea of overhauling the first Mass Effect. What would you change, or is it sacrilege to even go anywhere near it? Do you love your back button grenades like Mr. Josh Brown? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.